Welcome to Fonterra's first ever Ask Me Anything. I'm Andrew Patterson, and the topic today is water. We all care deeply about it, tying it to the clean, green image that we all have of New Zealand. And that links to Fonterra's reason for hosting this live stream, to constructively contribute to the national discussion on water and be fully transparent about this issue. We're live tonight, and you can still send us questions via the Fonterra website. Here to provide some context and answers to your questions, I'm joined by Trish Kirkland-Smith and Grant Wills. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew.
Trish, to you first, why don't you tell us a little bit about your role beyond your title as GM Environment at Fonterra?
Sure. I joined Fonterra's sustainability team earlier this year, and I have responsibility for the environment portfolio at Fonterra, and that's covering things like water, climate change, biodiversity and waste. And my role is to support just across the business and our farmers on implementing and delivering their kind of environmental and sustainability aspirations. So I've come from a background of, I'm an environmental manager for 25 years. I've worked in local government, the environmental not-for-profit sector, and communities, and more recently central government. And in that work, I was actually managing for the last few years the partnership between the Department of Conservation and Fonterra, and it's a program called Living Water. A lot of people won't know about it, but it's been going for 5 years. And I was really privileged to be able to work with about 30 staff who are on the ground, Fonterra and DOC staff, who are working on projects to improve water quality, biodiversity and farming practices right across the country, so from Northland to Southland. And really working on that partnership got me really interested in Fonterra, obviously. So when the opportunity arose to join the team, I thought about it really hard, and I thought I could make a real difference for New Zealand in this role with the challenges that New Zealand's facing. And so I'm really happy to be here tonight to answer the hard questions on water.
And clearly you're passionate about the environment.
Absolutely, 25 years, yeah.
All right, and to you, Grant, you're a farmer yourself. How long have you been farming? And I understand you've recently been in China as well too.
Yeah, that's right, Andrew. So I farm down in Walton, which is in the Waikato. So I'm the third generation there, but we've been dairy farming for 30 years now, and it's sort of, the business has evolved over that time. But yeah, last week we got back from China, so 41 of us did a tour around China, saw the Fonterra's footprint over there, what we're up to, and seen the markets. It was actually quite nice coming home, really, and enjoying our clean water and our fresh air. So.
And we're talking a lot about that tonight. Right, let's get to the questions, and there certainly have been plenty of them. Two key themes emerged in the questions that you've sent to us. One, what are farmers doing to restore waterways? And secondly, the type of land being farmed, and have we simply got too many cows in the national herd? So let's start by working our way through some of those themes. Grant, you're the farmer amongst us. How seriously are farmers taking this water issue? Because it seems to me that this issue has created something of an urban-rural divide, or is that perhaps misrepresenting the situation a bit much, do you think?
Well, on farm we need water, so we need it reticulated for our stock to drink and to cool our milk and to run our dairy plants. So that's all the water we have control of. But there's also the rainfall, of course, and that impacts on the soil water. So most of the time we either have too much or not enough. So it's just how we manage that. And farmers have become very aware of their water resource over the last 10 to 15 years and how we manage that. And farmers are responsible for the water and what comes out of their property. So we're very aware of what our impact is on the environment. So the urban-rural divide, as you call it, it's probably more around if you're in town or have your own section and you still have an impact on water and it leaves your property, and then it's not your responsibility, but the council or someone else will pick that up. But on farm, you're it.
So the litmus test, do you drink the water off your own farm?
Well, yes, I do, of course. So because with the practices we've put in place, yes, the water is drinkable on my farm, yes.
Trish, are farmers doing enough, or as some New Zealanders suggest, there seems to be a lot of lip service being paid, but it's a kind of a business as usual situation. Is that fair?
Look, it's definitely not lip service. What I've seen around the country over the last few years of working with farmers is, everything's true about the effluent management systems they've been putting in to stop that getting into waterways. They're really doing like the job of what the council would be doing in the urban environment. They're having to run their own wastewater systems. They have fenced stock out of waterways. They've put in culverts and crossings so that the animals aren't actually walking through the waterways. So that's really real, and there's a big effort going now into the riparian planting, etc. But the way I look at it is there's kind of three key parts to this puzzle, and like the first is really around turning off the pollution to start with, and that's when we're seeing like the effluent management happening and knowing that the cows can't get into waterways, etc. The second is having those really great environmental management practices on farm, and farmers are doing farm environment plans, and it's about it working for their piece of land. So it's not a cookie cutter and everybody has the same plan. The land's different, the water's different, how it flows is different, and the environmental practices then need to be different and really tailored to that piece of land. And then the third piece of the puzzle, I think, is around the restoration piece, and that is, the work that's been done has added to the restoration for the environment, the riparian planting, etc. But I'm seeing farmers now thinking, like Grant said, they're very aware and they're really starting to think of that bigger picture, and they might now be fencing off a native bush block and working with QE2 to put a covenant on it, or they might be fencing off a marginal piece of land that's really wet on the property, and you just wouldn't put stock there, and they might be then restoring that into wetlands. So we're starting to see the beginnings of that additional work in that kind of really environmental space. But I think for New Zealand as a whole, that approach of turning off the pollution, having the good practices and doing the restoration is for every piece of land in New Zealand, and I think that's what New Zealand has really woken up to recently. This is also a partnership between Fonterra and the regional councils as well. How does that work in practice? Yeah, the water... The water, when it flows, it doesn't know who owns the land. It doesn't know it's coming from mountains and it's going all the way to the sea. And it has no idea it's going through public land or private land. So all of this work that people are doing in land and water management, we've got to do it together. And, and that is the landowners, and that's your farmers, your growers, other business owners, and towns and cities as well. And we then work really closely with the councils around, what does this look like in this place and how to manage the land and water there. So they do all of the regional planning, and we contribute to that as well. And there's also other players. We work with some amazing scientists. We have partnerships with, Canterbury University and our work that we're doing in living water, but Dairy NZ has fantastic relationships and commission science and things like that too, because our farmers need the best scientific evidence, because they're making quite big investment decisions on their farm, and so they want to know that they're doing the right thing. So all of those pieces together are really important for this land and water management work. Grant, you've been a farmer for 30 years. How have you seen this issue change over that period of time?
The impact on our own business, it has to evolve over that period of time. But farmers' attitude has changed over that time as well. So we actually want to do better for the environment. We want to do better for our business, and they pretty much go hand in hand once you get on the roll. And I know on our farm, we fenced off the streams, etc., and that was stage one. But now, as Trish said, we're taking more land out because it's the right thing to do. And this issue has obviously evolved globally as well too, so farmers have had to kind of track that trend, I suppose, as well. Well, supposedly globally, but there's very few dairy industries in the world that have cows grazing on pasture like we do in New Zealand, even though, if you look at the brochures from anywhere else, it looks like they do, but it's a perception, it's not reality. Yeah. Well, let's get to some of the questions. Our first question comes from Anne Fabish, and she asks, what are farmers doing to protect wildlife in the streams and rivers that flow through their farms? We're talking about eels, whitebait, bird life. Grant? Well, a lot of these things seem to happen by default almost. So I know on our farm, we originally just fenced off the streams and then we planted some natives along the side of it. Those natives grew up. Other native plants came just naturally below that. Once they got higher, they formed shade, and then so the water temperature was more stable and cooler. And so with that, all the aquatic insects and marine life came in as well. And also bird life came in, and that's quite noticeable. And as more and more of it happens, there's these corridors of trees and plantings along the streams, so the birds have access to so much more of the country.
It must make you feel a lot more satisfied as a farmer to be contributing to that.
Well, it happened by default, and you know, I wouldn't call myself a greenie, but I really love the environment that we've created. Yeah.
Trish?
Yeah, I think that, you know, the concept of the riparian planting, everyone kind of gets that, and we know it's the right thing to do. And I think farmers are now also starting to get much more sophisticated around, it's not just about swimmable water, because you can have very clean water and no habitat for animals and everything in that. You know, a swimming pool and at home is swimmable, but nothing can live in there. So we're doing some really great work down in, say, in Canterbury and in Southland to try and turn what are these kind of agricultural drains, which are really straight, you know, steep-sided drains that the water moves through very quickly. We're just trying to get that water away. So we're working with numbers of partners of the universities and some of the Crown Research Institutes to turn them back into these healthy waterways that are full of life. And there's some really simple things that we can do in that space. And what we're seeing the farmers doing is, you know, taking these straight sided drains, battering them out so they're flatter and they're more meandering rather than being really, really straight. And we're basically putting logs and stones back into these streams to create places, habitat for the fish and the bugs. And that there is, it's just slowing the water down and it's letting nature come back. And I think, you know, putting nature back into these productive landscapes is where farming is heading in the future.
Question from Wyatt Walker. How do you intend to monitor the amount and effects of fertiliser and nitrogen that leaches and washes into waterways? I understand dairy farms are meant to declare the amounts they use, but how do you really know? I guess, Trish, from Fonterra's point of view here, are there requirements that farmers, you know, have to maintain in this area? Yeah,
absolutely. So we run a nitrogen management program for our farmers, so all the farmers have access to that and to that support. And what happens is the farmers provide us with all of their data from their farm, and that's all of their, you know, their stock usage and their fertiliser use and everything that's going on the farm. And then we have a bit of a crack team at Fonterra who put that into a system and model all of that nitrogen flows, so the losses and the efficiencies, etc. So we then produce an individual report for every farmer, and that goes back to that farmer, and they can use that in their management practices on their farm and look at it every season, you know, and see how they're improving and what's happening. So, you know, Grant, you would have received some reports in the past, so what do you do with them?
Yes, and it's been interesting for me because I've been able to watch trends as it's changed with management changes on farm. And you're right, so it's easy to monitor all the inputs. So, you know, fertiliser that comes on a truck and all our nutrients through our effluent, I know the concentrations of various nutrients within that, so we know what we're applying. And through these fancy tools, you know, we know our productivity level, the soil type, the terrain, and the stocking rate, and all those sorts of things, and put all that into the mix, and we get a number of what our end leaching is. So, and through that, I've been able to monitor and manage the farm differently. So we've dropped our end leaching by about a third already. So yeah.
And that's a performance indicator that you pay a lot of attention to, obviously.
Oh, and we need to. I think most farmers would like to, yes. Yeah. We have to remember that it's very specific to particular areas. So, you know, I can't compare my number with someone else in a different part of the country. So, yeah.
The next question comes from Garrick Batten. The campaign to fence waterways from cattle has been reasonably successful. However, what solutions will be implemented to counter the emerging problems of weeds such as thistles, blackberry and ragwort that grow behind the fences and then act as a nursery to invade adjoining paddocks?
Look, the whole weed problem is very underestimated, I think, when we've been looking at riparian planting as this quite massive solution across New Zealand. And everyone thinks that riparian planting is just putting a few trees in and then forgetting about them and walking away. But what we know is, weeds invade very quickly and the natives then don't survive as well. So, we look at this and making sure that the riparian management is really well planned, and it's about putting the right species in the right places. It's also then having a really strong maintenance program. And so, those first 3 years are critical for the native trees to actually become then dominant, and the native species become dominant, so the weeds don't then take over. But it's definitely not a plant and forget. And the farmers are really lucky. They've got access to Dairy NZ has a riparian planning tool, and so that's bespoke to different regions, so they know exactly what to do in those places, and planting guides and things like that. So the tools are out there, and we don't want the country taken over by weeds just because we decided to riparian plant. Yeah.
Give us a view on the pros and cons, Grant, I guess, of riparian planting and the investment of doing so, and is there a payoff environmentally?
Yes, well, from what Trish was saying, we actually, on our farm, we actually split up all the riparian planting that we were going to do earlier on, so we had manageable bites. So because the maintenance is quite significant, it needs to be kept up to date. But what I've found that if I tried to spread the plants out too much to save cost or whatever, then it created more work. So, I just finished planting 600 trees yesterday actually, and planting them a lot closer, which means that we will get that canopy cover that much sooner, so then weeds, etc., won't be such a problem. So,
To our next question from Brian Holland, how many years will it take for our rivers to run clean again, or will that never happen? This is a question really that I think a lot of New Zealanders would like an answer to. Trish, can you give us an answer?
Probably not really succinctly, Andrew, but look, what I get motivated and excited by is seeing the progress that can be made, and sometimes in quite a short amount of time. So, there is areas around New Zealand where communities have gotten together and landowners have done their part of the picture and worked with communities to do this restoration work, and they see results very quickly. So you see kind of the biodiversity tree planting results very quickly, but with water quality as well, they can make a difference in the space of 5 to 10 years. And I love looking around the country, and places like Ragland have been working and doing this for like the last 15 years, and the Harbour Care group there, they have all the science to back up that it has really improved that water quality, and the fishery is strong again, and etc. So there's that kind of scale that you can do in a short amount of time. Then, going a little bit wider, there's the Waikato River Authority, and that's a multi-stakeholder huge program, which the Waikato River goes from Taupo, all the way out to the coast up at Port Waikato, and there are multiple councils involved. There's multiple iwi involved, and all of the different landowners. And their work plan has got an 80-year vision. And because that's about not just trying to clean up the right here and now, it's about the care of that river for generations to come. And iwi really have brought that view to the table. So the scales are quite different. And then, like closer to home for me here in Auckland, just recently, the council passed a budget to accelerate their water quality improvement program. And so they had a program in place, I think, which was going to take 30 years to try and clean up the beaches and do all of that same kind of stream work and restoration. And the budget's gone in now, and ratepayers are paying for that, and that work program is now a 10-year improvement program. So, the timeframes are different and different everywhere, and we've just, it's about who has to get together to do it, and also the investment over how long.
Grant, what's been your experience on your own farm?
Well, I've had about 15 years of planting on our place, and I've seen huge changes, but I've had control of my whole farm kind of thing. And so, like I said, I'm happy to drink the water that comes out of our place. We have to probably remember that what we're doing on farm now reflects the water quality in the future, not today. So, there's a bit of a not quite balanced for what we're doing today and the water quality. So that will happen in the future. So hence the 80-year time frame for the Waikato.
Richard Boyden's question follows on from this theme. It's a two-part question. Our riverways are a concern to most people, and the world is watching us now too. How much have Fonterra farmers done to clean up rivers, and which regions are taking action and which ones have yet to start? I guess the public want facts, not just lip service. Trish? Absolutely.
Look, the farmers, as Grant said, last 10 to 15 years, that awareness, that waterway awareness and the water quality awareness has really risen. And we've seen farmers, fencing waterways for actually 20 years, some of them. More recently, there's been the Sustainable Dairying Water Accord, and the last version of that was about 2013, I think, and that really ramped up the effluent management on farms, and then getting the stock out of the waterway and putting those culverts and bridges in and doing the fencing, and now we're onto the riparian side of things. So, that is real and it's happened, and we're on our way. And then the work that I've been doing, more looking at the catchments across the country, and particularly with Living Water, and then working with the regional councils, is this is happening everywhere. Our farmers did the effluent and the fencing. That's every farm across the whole country. And now we've got other programs where Living Water's in Northland, in Waikato, in Canterbury, and Southland. And we have other Fonterra staff who I know sit on, river care groups in Taranaki and Bay of Plenty, Manawatu and Takaka. So there's nowhere really that this isn't happening now.
And Grant, I guess when we think of your own experience, and I guess if you think of some of your neighbours as well, just how big a job are we talking about to achieve this sort of outcome?
Well, probably on our place, we've planted about 10,000 trees. We're probably, it's 750 cow size farm, so that's about 8 or 9 k's of fencing. The effluent treatment system, that's about $250,000. So each farmer would be spending that sort of money. So it's a fairly big investment that farmers have already spent to get things right.
So, lucky last question, particularly on restoring waterways. Tony Palmer asks, is it possible to channel water runoff after rain into sediment ponds, perhaps with the help of bund walls? And Grant, you might have to explain for the non-farmers what a bund wall is.
Yeah, so a bund is... It's pretty much a settling pond or a sump. So, when you have a lot of rainfall coming down with carrying sediment, it can run through this sort of a pond system where the solids will settle out and the water can continue past. And they are used on more of the steeper farms, more so.
Are they successful?
Yes, they are, yeah. They need to be dug out once summer comes or once it's dried. But yes, they do trap a lot of sediment. There's other things that people can do on farm. We're not quite as steep, but we would just have cutouts on races so that any runoff can go down across the pasture and be filtered through the soil structure that way, rather than in one central point.
And what about technology in this space? Are there developments in this area that's perhaps helping this process as well too?
Technology for
I guess helping the management of water in these areas. Are there other innovations, I guess, perhaps that are coming around in the space as well?
Well, I'm not quite sure if there are, but I'm sure.
I think there actually there's quite a lot of science going on around the water quality work, and we've, I was just thinking about the bunds, etc. We're piloting some up in Northland, and so it might work in one place, but we also then need to prove that it works somewhere else. So we're trialling different sizes and in different places. And around the Waikato peat lakes, we've actually put in these amazing kind of sediment traps that are doing exactly what Grant said to let that sediment settle and move forward. But the science is there's like nitrogen and phosphorus biofilters that are being piloted. There's different fertiliser application techniques that are being piloted. And so that link with the science and technology is really important. And I think farmers, they're not just the horse and cart people. These guys are using apps. There's precision farming coming. People are using drones and things like that on farm. So I think that what that looks like over the next few years is actually quite weirdly exciting. I don't know how farmers feel about it. You're going to be running your farm with a drone, but.
Oh, if it's science-based, farmers are comfortable. You want to know you're doing things for the right reasons. Yeah.
Right, let's change tack and move on to the type of land being used for farming, and why don't we just cut the amount of stock, which will surely solve a whole heap of problems for the country around water and climate change. The first question in this area comes from Sally Edgerton, particularly around the situation in the Mackenzie Basin, which has been in the news a lot. And Sally asks, dairying in the Mackenzie Basin and areas not naturally abundant in water raises many important issues. What does Fonterra think of dairy farms being established in these areas, and do you care about the fact that beautiful landscapes are being ruined by dairy farms setting up in these places?
Yeah, look, I care about natural landscapes across all of New Zealand, and joining Fonterra. They've actually come out very publicly recently around their real concern in the Mackenzie Basin, and I think what a lot of people don't know is that Fonterra actually have to pick up the milk from any farmer that requests us to do so, and all we can do is ensure that farmer has all of the environmental resource consents from the councils, and then we have to pick the milk up. So we're actually governed by this legislation that helped set us up many, many years ago, and the government is currently reviewing that legislation, and so we have a real hope that we'll be freed from that obligation to pick up milk from just anywhere, and that's for the environmental impacts it might be having in some of these places.
Grant, your thoughts on this area?
Yeah, I agree with Trish, but we also have to remember that some of our most fertile land is around where our main towns and cities are that we've lost because it's under concrete and asphalt now. So, we're using, the Mackenzie Basin is, it's a unique area, but there's some very poor quality farms that are trying to make a living, but we're losing a lot of really high quality fertile soils to urban sprawl, really. Yeah.
Karen Wilkinson has a slightly different twist on this issue. She's asking, why do farmers irrigate obviously unsuitable land for farming? Surely there must be plenty of suitable land that doesn't need irrigating that can be used instead. Taking water from a local water source has a huge impact, especially in summer when water levels are low. We see the poor farmers in summer who can't run the irrigators because it's too dry. Thoughts? Yeah, look, land use suitability, I think, is one of the hot discussion topics at the moment, and I know the government are working on this. Minister Parker has been looking at what can we do around this water quality issue, and so land use suitability, about putting the right things in the right place in New Zealand is really important. And I think for farmers, they're really getting to know and understand their land very, very well, and that is why they're kind of they're thinking, oh, maybe I retire that piece of land or I use it for something else. So the land use suitability at a farm scale, that thinking is being had, and also then at the regional and the national scale. So look, I'm really interested to see how that unfolds for New Zealand, because there's a lot of information flying around that there's going to be less dairy and more horticulture, and then hort uses lots of chemicals and things like that too. So but it's a big conversation for New Zealand. I don't know if farmers are having that on the ground. Oh, and all those farmers that have set up in those positions and put irrigation on, they've actually followed the rules at that time. So they've got irrigation consents. They've done everything right. It's not them that's the problem. They've fitted into the system that's allowed them to do that. They've just seen the opportunity. That's right. Yeah. And that opportunity might change in the future. We'll wait and see. Yeah. Isn't, I guess, one solution to this this challenge around agriculture is simply cutting stock numbers? Sheep and beef and dairy are all similar in terms of emissions and environmental damage caused by stock. And why not just cut the stock numbers?
Well, I suppose we could go to the real extreme and take all the stock out, and so we'll still have some end leaching, but it'll solve some problems. But the country's GDP will probably halve, so we'll have a much lower lifestyle value in the country. The other way is not use any land, so pretty much have all the stock housed, and there are places in the world that actually do that and contain all the outputs, so the effluent, etc., bring in all the inputs. So that's the other extreme. But then you actually find that a lot of the markets don't want that. The customers are what drive the demand for the product, and that's not that savoury to a lot of the world. So somewhere in between there should be a balance, and it should be around efficiency of what you put in and what comes out, including the effluent and the end leaching and all those sorts of things. So there'll be a balance there somewhere, and it will be different for different farms and different places in the country.
So Trish, what are your thoughts on this whole peak dairying issue? Are we close to that, or are there still changes that are going to be made in the future?
Yeah, I agree with Grant that cow numbers is just one part of the equation. Yeah. There's farmers. So in New Zealand, the environmental management kind of philosophy is we look at outcomes and we set environmental limits, and then we have a system which then allows the landowner to figure out how to farm or how to grow or how to run their business within that framework. So to achieve the outcomes and work within the limits. And so your numbers of cows and the pasture you have and the dairy system you use, or all of those decisions, that's the farmer's decision, and we're not going to get into, Fonterra isn't going to get into talking about how many cows everybody should have, because every paddock's different and every region's different. So I think the kind of cow number argument is just quite an unsophisticated way of looking at it. Yes, it grabs the headlines, and it seems so easy. Imagine if it was that easy, but it's just not, because you want the land to be efficiently used. And if everybody just was allowed 2 cows per hectare or something like that, well, that's not efficient, because we know how the variability across the country is.
And each cow is different. So I'd have cows that produce twice as much as another cow. So which one do I keep?
Yeah.
Right, time's moving on. Let's change tack slightly. Patrick Sharp, our next question, is looking to the future, and he asks, some people argue that feeding the world's population on animal-based food products like meat and dairy is not sustainable and will not always be profitable due to the damage it does to the planet in the long term. Is Fonterra looking at expanding into non-animal food product alternatives that don't require as much land and resources as cattle, while decreasing the number of cattle, whether it's plant-based milk, synthetic milk, or lab-grown milk, or something else that doesn't require so many cows? Grant, I guess this really strikes at the heart of the livelihood of you and your fellow farmers, but this is a huge potential issue, isn't it?
Oh, it is, and if someone was successful enough in finding that, well, we wouldn't have a business at all, probably. But the thing is, with dairy milk, it's such a nutritious food source, and it has been used for so long. There's so many different minerals and vitamins in it that it's very hard to replicate through a synthetic sort of a process. And its versatility, of the number of products that can be made out of the milk, that's really an advantage as well. And I mentioned I'd just been to China, and we walked through the supermarket there, and the person pointed out coconut milk on the shelf, but this contains protein from your dairy milk. So, all these substitutes aren't necessarily as good as what we have, and so that was an example of the dairy milk being used to substitute into a competitor's product, really. So,
But is this an issue that farmers are really having to think a lot about? Because we see disruption happening in so many different areas. Surely farmers can't be immune from this at some point down the track.
They're not immune to it, but from a farmer's perspective, I'm running a business selling milk. I don't know what other option I would have, but we would expect the science to be continuing alongside us, so to make sure that we are finding the best value for our product. The other thing is that dairy products are a natural product, and that's what the customers want. So if you have something that's been made in a lab, are there going to be people that want to buy it, unless it's like 1/10 of the price of dairy milk or something? dairy nutrition is for all, and it's very attractive to most people. So.
Trish, from a Fonterra perspective, obviously this must be occupying the minds of those in Fonterra as well too.
Yeah, well, look, I'm no expert in synthetics and what this will look like in the future, but I do know in the kind of 6 months that I've been in this role that Fonterra has their eye on global trends. So I would be thinking that there are a lot of people across this in the business, and they're looking at customer demand, like Grant said. And right now, New Zealand produces some of the best milk in the world, and it's the most nutritious milk. So, customers are buying it from us, and they're they love the story, the backstory about New Zealand and where it was made. And Grant was telling me when he went to China that he thought he was going to China to learn what was going on over there, but most people wanted to see where he was from and what it looked like to be a farmer from this country.
And to have faith that this milk has been produced off pasture, in a paddock in New Zealand. So it's not common.
Just more broadly, Grant, you've obviously been farming for 30 years. How have you seen technology change in that time?
Oh, well, 30 years ago, I probably had a rain gauge and wrote it down each day if it rained.
And that was the basis of your environmental management.
Yeah, that's right. And to know how much grass I had out there, I'd walk through each paddock. So now, 30 years later, I have monitors that measure rain, obviously, wind direction, soil temperature at different depths.
Nitrogen levels.
Not nitrogen levels yet, but I'm sure that'll be coming. We get that through the tools that we talked about earlier. And even doing the farm walk, we use satellites. So I get a weekly farm walk, really, of what sort of cover we've got on the farm. All the cows have collars on now, so we can monitor their activity, so we can make sure that they're healthy and what they're up to. So all those sort of things certainly will probably complicate the business, but we've got a lot of tools available that we didn't have 30 years ago anyway.
All right, and here's a final question that perhaps isn't so much about the future, but takes us back to the past. Trish, it comes from Alex Bonham. Is it possible to move to a reusable glass bottle system to reduce plastic pollution in the oceans and waterways? Are we going to go back to what we had?
Back to the beginning, back to the future. Look, the whole plastics issue is actually, it's really hit the mainstream, hasn't it? Everybody's talking about it. You're seeing the pictures on the news about these big plastic floating bergs in the middle of the ocean, and even going to the local beach. People are starting to see the plastics hitting us. So, that's very much in the front of mind in New Zealand now. And look, at Fonterra, we do packaging innovation. We're always looking at how our products are. How they're packaged, how they're transported, and what that looks like. And they have looked at glass, and because we've been asked this question quite a bit, I think, from what I've heard. But glass is actually, the key things that we're looking for is really about, we're looking for food safety. So we need to have really safety as the top of the game for us, and those bottles that go round and round and round and get reused, they can start to chip, and there can be little bits of glass that might get into the product. And so that food safety thing for us is a bit of a... So you can't really have the integrity
of it so much.
Yeah, is a bit of a worry for us. And then glass is really heavy. And so transporting it actually probably creates more carbon emissions. And so it's quite complicated. It's not about let's just go back to glass. And in New Zealand, I think that to do that system, all the glass would have to come to Auckland, and so you're transporting empty bottles across the country. So look, our team, like I said, we've got packaging teams in Fonterra, and they're really looking at what the future of packaging looks like for our products. And just like everybody else, we're worried about the plastics issue that everyone is globally as well.
So really it's going to be around probably the innovation of packaging and some new form of plastic, which presumably is going to biodegrade better over time.
That's right, and it's again, the New Zealand government is looking at this as well. Minister Sage she's right on top of the recycling issues that we're having in New Zealand, because we used to send our recycling to China and they've closed their doors, etc. So what we do in New Zealand now and the decisions that we make over the next few years is really critical in this waste space for us. Yeah.
Well, I'm getting the wind up. We're just about out of time. Some good questions and hopefully some informative answers to provide some context around this very important issue. Obviously, water quality is both a rural and an urban issue, and as 92% of respondents in a recent Colmar-Brunton poll pointed out, it's the responsibility of all of us to do the job, not just individual sectors and not just the government, but all of us. Thanks to everyone who posted a question for this first Ask Me Anything. You will get a personal response back. Until next time, on behalf of Trish and Grant and Fonterra, we thank you for joining us and we look forward to seeing you again in the future.